My laptop here at church has a battery that will power it for about 4 hours. It has a Wi-Fi receiver built into it so that it picks up the signal of the wireless transmitter here at church so that I can take my laptop with me anywhere in the building and still access the files that I need from the church's server. I can leave my office and go upstairs to the Jubilee room for a meeting and still open a Word file or download my email or search the internet. Even the voicemail recordings of phone messages that come in while I'm away from the office will get forwarded to my laptop over the wireless network. But after about 4 hours of heavy computer use, a warning message appears on my screen telling me that the battery is getting low. It's not a crisis. The computer isn't about to crash. I'm not going to lose all the information that I've been working on. But I know that I can't wait much longer before I recharge the battery by connecting my laptop to its power source. If I ignore the warning and keep on working, then my laptop begins turning off functions. And the first thing that it shuts off is the wireless receiver. My laptop prevents itself from crashing by isolating itself. It turns off the connection between it and all the other devices in the area. Today we're continuing our Lenten series on 40 Days of Grace by exploring this movement from disappointment and sadness and depression into grace. Will you join me in prayer? Let the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, for you are our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. Depression is an incredibly isolating experience. It drains away our capacity to stay connected, to be in relationship with others, to share our lives with the people around us. Depression leaves us feeling so depleted that we feel empty inside. We lose interest in all of the things that once brought enjoyment into our lives, and sleep loses its restorative powers. We can't fall asleep, or we can't stay awake. We can't concentrate. Making even simple decisions feels overwhelming to us. Sometimes when we're in the depths of depression, thoughts of suicide offer the only hope of relief. When the battery in my laptop gets low, it turns off the wireless receiver and stops communicating with all other devices. Something like that happens when we get depressed. Even when people are doing their best to help us and care for us and reach out to us with compassion and with understanding, we simply don't have the energy that it takes to be connected. In order to save ourselves from crashing, we isolate ourselves. We withdraw. Depression is an incredibly isolating experience. There are lots of factors that contribute to depression, some hereditary, some psychological, some environmental, some circumstantial. Depression has a medical dimension, it has a cognitive dimension, it has a spiritual dimension, and recovery from depression often requires a combination of the right antidepressant medications, the right talk therapy, the right spiritual practices. Last week I said there is a common thread of fear that connects all of us on the anxiety side of the emotional continuum. Today I want to suggest that there is a common thread of disappointment that connects all of us on the depression side of the emotional continuum. We all know what disappointment feels like. It's that experience that we have anytime things don't work out the way we had hoped. When we wake up in the morning and the scratchiness in our throat hasn't gone away. When our favorite college basketball team doesn't make it into the Sweet 16. When a partner or a colleague or a friend says or does something that doesn't measure up to our expectations, we feel disappointed. We know why we feel the way we do. It may or may not be a reasonable response to what has happened, but it is a response to some definite, identifiable thing that hasn't measured up to our expectations. I'm disappointed that I'm sick, that my team hasn't made it into the tournament, that my friend made the choice that she did. Sometimes disappointment lingers for a long, long time, but no matter how long it lingers, we always know what it's connected to. But sometimes disappointment broadens into sadness. Sadness is a more generalized mood state that has a deeper level of disillusionment. When we're sad, it's usually not in response to any one thing. There's a whole constellation of events and circumstances that have ganged up on us and left us feeling much less optimistic about our circumstances in life. There isn't anything that we can do to snap ourselves out of a bad mood, a sad mood. We still have enough energy to go about our lives, but it feels as if we're on the outside looking in. We're aware of other people's laughter and happiness, and we want to join in, but we can't. No matter how hard we try, we just can't break the spell of sadness that's been cast over us. Depression moves the disillusionment of sadness all the way to despair. Life feels hopeless when we're caught in the grips of depression, when other people try to help us and care for us and lift us out of our depression. Instead of feeling grateful, we feel guilty and ashamed. Nothing we can do, nothing anyone else can do can lift us up. It's as if our Wi-Fi receiver has shut down and we no longer have the capacity to be connected to each other or to God. Today we heard the story of the Old Testament prophet Elijah, who was caught in the grip of depression and had lost his will to live. Elijah's descent into depression started with the disappointment that he experienced over the treatment he received for exposing the priests of the Canaanite fertility god Baal as frauds. Ahab, the king of Israel, had married a Canaanite woman named Jezebel, and under the queen's influence had allowed temples to Baal to be built throughout Israel. Elijah was deeply offended by the corrupting influence of these pagan temples, and so he decided to challenge the priests of Baal to a showdown on Mount Carmel to see which god was truly worthy of worship. Elijah had the priests of Baal build an altar and sacrifice a bull and cut it into pieces and pile wood on the altar and lay the bull on top of the wood and call on their god to consume their offering with fire. And so they built their offer. They built their altar and laid their sacrifice upon it and danced around their altar and sang their sacred songs and offered their prayers and called upon the name of their God to receive their offering and to provide a sign by kindling fire to consume their sacrifice, but nothing happened. Elijah mocked the priests of Baal and goaded them on, saying, "Sing louder. Maybe your God's meditating. Maybe your God has wandered off. Maybe your God's taking a nap. Sing louder." And they did. And nothing happened. Then Elijah made an altar with 12 stones, one for each of the 12 tribes of Israel, and he piled it with wood, and he sacrificed a bull and cut it into pieces and laid it upon the wood, and then he doused it all with water. And then he poured water over everything a second time and a third time until the water overflowed the trench that had been dug around the altar. And when Elijah called on the name of the Lord, the God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, the sacrifice that he offered was consumed by fire that burned so fiercely that even the stones were reduced to dust. After the fraud of the priests of Baal was exposed, Elijah slew them all with his sword. But instead of becoming a national hero, Elijah became a fugitive. Queen Jezebel was furious when she heard what had happened and sent soldiers to go and slay Elijah so that he was forced to flee for his life. That was not the way he had envisioned things working out. He was deeply disappointed, and his disappointment broadened into sadness when he realized he could never go back to the life he had known before. He couldn't return home, couldn't be with his family, couldn't resume his prophetic role in the community, couldn't restore his relationships with friends and colleagues. Elijah had done everything he'd been asked to do, everything that had been expected of him. He'd been faithful to God and had taken tremendous personal risk in exposing the fraud of the priests of Baal, but instead of being rewarded, he was persecuted. The only prayer that Elijah could pray at that moment in his life was a bitter lament. I have been very zealous for the Lord, the God of hosts. For the Israelites have forsaken your covenant. They have torn down your altar. They have slain your priests, and I alone am left. And they seek my life to take it away. Elijah's sadness plummeted into depression when he realized that there was no place left for him, nowhere to go, nothing to do, no work to make him feel worthwhile, no purpose to fulfill, no reason to go on any longer. When Elijah finally stopped running, he was overcome with despair. He left his servant behind in Beersheba and went on alone deep into the wilderness until he finally collapsed, exhausted, unable to go on any further. He sat down in the shade of a broom tree, and Elijah quit. It's enough. Now, O Lord, take away my life. And that's where Elijah began experiencing the healing grace of God. When he collapsed exhausted, an angel of the Lord ministered to him, feeding him cakes baked on hot stones and bringing him water. All that Elijah could do was eat and drink and sleep. And that was enough. The angel of the Lord kept Elijah alive as he grieved the loss of everything he had known in the past. And then, when the prophet was rested, the angel of the Lord sent him on a journey to Horeb, to the Mount of God, that sacred place where the covenant between God and the people of Israel had first been recorded on tablets of stone passed on to Moses. And in a cave at the top of Mount Horeb, the prophet Elijah stood still and waited. Waited for a word from God. That's the spiritual work that depression requires of us. It demands that we stand still, that we quit our frenetic activity, that we disconnect from all the other voices speaking to us and listen for a word from God. Not in the mighty wind or the fierce earthquake or the consuming fire, but in the sound of sheer silence. We love the story of Elijah standing before the mouth of the cave, listening for that still small voice of God, but we forget that he was only able to be still because he was depressed. Because he had lost all hope of ever returning to the life that he had known before, because he was so exhausted that he couldn't go on one more step. Only from the depths of his depression was Elijah able to discern the new thing that God was calling him to do. Our culture views depression as a pathological condition, a mental illness that needs to be cured as quickly as possible with medication and therapy. It is a source of deep embarrassment and shame that we never talk about out loud and try our best to keep hidden from others. But the story of the Old Testament prophet Elijah reminds us that the spiritual work of depression is to be attentive to the stillness, to stop doing what we're doing and rest, to allow ourselves to experience the grief of all that's lost to us, to give up any hope of ever recovering the life that we once had, so that in the sound of sheer silence, we can finally hear the voice of God calling us to new life.